All right, everybody. Welcome back. This is actually a little bit in the past. We're about 5 minutes past. Arizona has already come up. There's already been an objection. They've already gone into the 2 hour deliberation on the Arizona vote. So basically, what happens is each state is called to vote. If there is an objection, the objection has to be by a House member and a Senate member in writing. They then go to their independent chambers. Instead, they'll go to a different chamber. They're already in the House chamber. Each of the congressional, the Senate and the House, will have 2 hours to debate the validity of the challenge. At the end of 2 hours, law states that they have to call for up, down, simple majority vote on whether they're going to accept the objection or not. In order for the electoral vote to change, both the Senate and the House have to independently vote to change. If one votes to change and the other votes not to change, then there will be no change and the electoral vote will be counted as put forth. So, and Arizona being the first state called, we're already into the 2 hour window for that. So we're about, like I said, about 5 minutes behind on this. If I'm gonna go ahead and, all right. All right, just go over again. This is slightly behind. This is the very beginning. Arizona has already been called, and it's already been challenged. So they're already in debate about.
Agree to what we have 11 members on each side so that we can responsibilities to this chamber, to this responsibility, and to this House of Representatives. Please exit the floor if you do not have an assigned role from your leadership. You can share with your staff if you want to have a few more, but you cannot be that close together floor of the House with that many people in here And I thank the Senate and the Democrats for abiding by the rules. Let's go. Let's just start. Okay.
Madam Speaker and members of Congress, pursuant to the Constitution and the laws of the United States, the Senate and House of Representatives are meeting in joint session to verify the certificates and count the votes of the electors of the several states for President and Vice President of the United States. After ascertainment has been had that the certificates are authentic and correct in form, the tellers will count and make a list of the votes cast by the electors of the several states. The tellers on the part of the two houses have taken their places at the clerk's desk. Without objection, the tellers will dispense with the reading of the formal portions of the certificates. After ascertaining that the certificates are regular in form and authentic, the tellers will announce the votes cast by the electors for each state, beginning with Alabama, which the parliamentarians advise me is the only certificate of vote from that state and purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of that state purporting to appoint or ascertain electors. Mr. Blunt. For what purpose does the gentleman from Virginia rise?
Point of order, parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Vice President. In order to follow with the Speaker's instructions that only a limited number of people be on the floor, may I ask how one would make an objection or make a parliamentary inquiry in the future if you're not on the floor but in the gallery?
Just under section 18, just read the first one.
Under Section 18 of Title III of the United States Code, debate is not permitted in the joint session.
You want to hand that to her?
Gentleman's recognized.
I'm not attempting to debate. I'm trying to find out how a parliamentary inquiry or a parliamentary point of order would be made in following with the Speaker's request that most of us not be on the floor. How do you make one of those points of order when you don't know what's going to happen later?
Respectfully, the gentleman's parliamentary inquiry constitutes debate, which is not permitted in the joint session under Section 18 of Title III United States Code. With that, Mr. Blunt.
I don't think it's on.
I don't believe it's on.
It's not on.
All right.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Let's get order, gentlemen.
Want me to read it whether they can hear it or not?
They think it's working, so we'll try again.
Mr. President,
Order in the chamber.
Mr. President,
Gentleman will continue.
the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alabama seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 9 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 9 votes for vice president.
Are there any objections to counting the certificate of vote of the state of Alabama that the teller has verified appears to be regular in form and authentic? Hearing none. This certificate from Alaska, the parliamentarians advise me, is the only certificate of vote from that state that purports to be a return from the state, and that has annexed to it a certificate from an authority of the state purporting to appoint and ascertain electors.
Mr. President, the certificate of the electoral vote of the state of Alaska seems to be regular in form and authentic, and it appears therefrom that Donald J. Trump of the state of Florida received 3 votes for president, and Michael R. Pence of the state of Indiana received 3 votes.
I rise up for myself and 60 of my colleagues to object to the counting of the electoral ballots from Arizona.
Is the objection in writing and signed by a senator?
Yes, it is.
It is.
I need the next page. An objection presented in writing and signed by both a representative and a senator complies with the law, Chapter 1 of Title 3 of the United States Code. The clerk will report the objection.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given.
Are there further objections to the certificates from the state of Arizona? The chair hears none. The 2 houses will withdraw from joint session. Each house will deliberate separately on the pending objection and report its decision back to the joint session. The Senate will now retire to its chamber.
All right, for a little context, I'm going to be going
Senators
forward
are
here.
making their way across the Capitol into the upper chamber.
They'll be going in to each chamber, the Senate into theirs, the House into theirs. They'll have 2 hours legally to hear discussion from both sides. At the end of 2 hours, they will have to vote a simple majority, yea or nay, to accept or reject the electoral votes from that state. Both the Senate and the House have to vote one way or the other in order for it to be binding. So if they're going to throw out the vote for Arizona and replace it with a vote for Trump, both the House would have to vote for that and the Senate. If only one of them votes for it, then nothing changes. So you would need both the House and the Senate to vote. The problem with that is the House is Democrat controlled. Now, this is the same process for every state that is objected to. They each get 2 hours, unless in the joint session they change the rules. So we'll see how this goes. It could be a very long time. But as this has already happened, I'm going to go ahead and skip to this.
And advice of the attending physician. Members are advised to remain in the chamber only if they are participating in debate and must wear a mask at all times, even when under recognition for debate. Members must also practice proper social distancing when present in the chamber. Let the record show that there is a gross violation of this guidance from the attendants on the Republican side of the aisle. Please, in the interest of your own health and as an example to the American people, abide by the numbers, now up to 25 on each side of the aisle, to participate in this stage of the development, okay? Pursuant to Senate Concurrent Resolution 1, and Section 17 of Title 3 of the United States Code, when the two houses withdraw from the joint session to count the electoral vote for separate consideration of an objection, a representative may speak to the objection for 5 minutes and not more than once. Debate shall not exceed 2 hours, after which the chair will put in the question, shall the objection be agreed to? The clerk will report the objection made in the joint session.
Objection to counting the electoral votes of the state of Arizona. We, a member of the House of Representatives and a United States Senator, object to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona on the ground that they were not, under all of the known circumstances, regularly given. Signed, Paul Gosar, Representative, State of Arizona. Ted Cruz, Senator, State of Texas.
Thank you. The chair will endeavor to alternate recognition between members seeking support of the objection and members seeking opposition to the objection. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise today to object to a number of states that did not follow the constitutional requirement for selecting electors. Madam Speaker, this is something that is clear that our founding fathers debated about as a fundamental decision of how we choose our president. There was a lot of back and forth, if anyone reads the founding documents of our country, about the different versions they went through to ultimately come up with a process where each state has elections, each state has a process for selecting their electors and sending them to Washington. And Madam Speaker, in a number of those states, that constitutional process was not followed. And that's why we're here to object. If you look at what the requirement says, nowhere in Article 2, Section 1 does it give the Secretary of State of a state that ability. Nowhere does it give the governor that ability. Nowhere does it give a court that ability. It exclusively gives that ability to the legislatures. And in fact, in most states, that's the process that was followed. But for those states that this wasn't followed, unfortunately, this is not new. We've seen over and over again more states where the Democrat Party has gone in and selectively gone around this process. That has to end, Madam Speaker. We have to follow the constitutional process. Now, there might be reasons why some people don't like the process laid out by a legislative body. Madam Speaker, I served on one of those legislative bodies when I was in the state legislature for 12 years. I served on the House and Governmental Affairs Committee where we wrote the laws for our state's elections. And I can tell you, when we had to make changes, those were extensively negotiated We would have people on both sides come, Republicans and Democrats, Madam Speaker, would get together to work through those changes, any minute change, to how a precinct would function, to how a change would be made in the time of an election, signature requirements, all the many things that involve a clerk carrying out the duties in each parish, in our case. You would see people come and give testimony. Madam Speaker, both sides could come. Clerks of court were there in the hearing rooms. It was an open process, by the way, not behind closed doors in a smoke-filled room where somebody might want to bully a Secretary of State to get a different version that might benefit them or their party or their candidate. That's not what our founding fathers said is the process. Maybe it's how some people wanted to carry it out, but they laid out that process. And so when we would have to make those changes, they were in public view. They were heavily debated. And then ultimately, those laws were changed in advance of the election so everybody knew what the rules were. People on both sides knew how to play the rules before the game started, not getting somewhere in the process and saying, well, you don't think it's going to benefit you, so you try to go around the Constitution. That's not how our system works. It's gotten out of hand. And so President Trump has called this out. And President Trump has stood up to it. So many of us have stood up to it. And in fact, over 100 of my colleagues, Madam Speaker, asked the Supreme Court to address this problem just a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, the court chose to punt. They didn't answer it one way or the other. They didn't want to get in the middle of this discussion. We don't have that luxury today. We have to discuss this. We have to fix this. In fact, on our first full day of this Congress, many of us brought legislation onto the House floor to start fixing the problems with our elections, to restore integrity to the election process, which has been lost by so many millions of Americans. And we had a vote. Every single Republican voted to reform the process. Every single Democrat voted against it. They don't want to fix this problem. But the Constitution is our guide. And it's time we start following the Constitution. It's time we get back to what our founding fathers said is the process for selecting electors. That's the legislatures. In public view, not behind closed doors, not smoke-filled rooms, not bullying somebody that might give you a better ruling. Let's get back to rule of law and follow the Constitution, Madam Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlewoman It's over now. I thought it was Jamie. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from California seek recognition?
To strike the last word.
Without objection, the gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, this day marks a crossroads for American democracy. Those who object to the counting of the Electoral College votes, which reflect the votes of the American people, want to substitute their preferences for the voter's choice. That's not what our Constitution requires, and it's at odds with the American Democratic Republic. If Congress selects the next president instead of American voters, we'll have no need for an electoral college. In fact, we'd have no need for presidential elections at all. We'd be moving from a government elected by the people to a government selected by those already governing. That's not America. In the United States, we abide by the choices of the people, not an elite few. The framers of our Constitution considered whether to have Congress select the president and specifically rejected it. Instead, they wrote Article 2 and the 12th Amendment. Article 2 creates the Electoral College, where each state appoints electors. Laws of all 50 states and D.C. require electors to vote for the winner of the state's popular election. Each state provides for the orderly conduct of elections, including lawful challenges, recounts, and the like. The 12th Amendment is what brings us to today. It says the electors meet in their states. That happened December 14th. The amendment says the electors shall cast their votes, sign and certify them, transmit them to a seal. That's been done. The sealed envelopes containing the signed, certified ballots from each state's electors, reflecting the votes of the people, were in those mahogany boxes.
The 12th Amendment directs the President, as the Vice President, as the President of the Senate, to do only this: open the sealed envelopes, and then the vote shall be counted. Simple. It doesn't say counted in a manner that some members of Congress or the Vice President might prefer. No. The votes are simply to be counted as certified and transmitted by the states. During Reconstruction after the Civil War, more than one slate of electors were appointed by states. Dueling lists were sent and protracted processes were undertaken in presidential elections. And as a result, to make an orderly process, Congress enacted the Electoral Count Act of 1887. This law governs our proceedings today. The act provides dispute resolution mechanisms. Under the ECA, if a governor certifies a slate of electors and there are no competing slates from that state, the governor's certified slate must be counted. Today, every single slate of electors, won by Joe Biden or won by Donald Trump, got their governor's certification. Not a single state submitted a competing slate. There's no dispute to resolve. The 2020 election was the most secure election conducted in modern history. Challenges were resolved by lawful recounts and audits. The result, Vice President Biden won the 2020 election. More than 60 lawsuits were filed contesting elements of the election process. None of these lawsuits prevailed. Why? As even President Trump's own judicial appointees ruled, there was no evidence of any wrongdoing that would change the outcome. The people spoke. It was not a close election. The margin of victory for Biden in 2020 was larger than Trump's margin in 2016. In fact, the Biden victory is one of the most decisive in modern times, exceeding the margin enjoyed by Reagan when he defeated Carter in 1980. Congress has gathered in joint session to count electoral votes every 4 years since 1789. I understand the disappointment people feel when their candidate for president loses. I've felt the same several times in my voting life. When that happens, it's not an invitation to upend the Constitution and the laws of the United States. It's an invitation to work with the new president for the good of the country and to wait for the next election in 4 years if you're dissatisfied. In that spirit, I urge my colleagues to uphold the American democracy and reject the objection, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Who is that? For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise to support the objection.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, Americans instinctively know there was something wrong with this election. During the campaign, Vice President Biden would do an event and he'd get 50 people at the event. President Trump, at just one rally, gets 50,000 people. President Trump increases vote with African Americans, increases vote with Hispanic Americans, won 19 of 20 bellwether counties, won Ohio by 8, Iowa by 8, and Florida by 3. Got 11 million more votes than he did in 2016, and House Republicans won 27 of 27 toss-up races. But somehow, the guy who never left his house wins the election? 80 million Americans, 80 million of our fellow citizens, Republicans and Democrats, have doubts about this election. And 60 million people, 60 million Americans think it was stolen. But Democrats say, no problem, no worries, everything's fine. We asked for an investigation. We asked Chairman Nadler, Chairwoman Maloney for an investigation. They said no. Wouldn't want to investigate something that half the electorate has doubts about. It's just the presidency of the United States. Why? Why not one single investigation? Why not even one single hearing over the last 9 weeks in the United States House of Representatives? Why? Because all the Democrats care about is making sure President Trump isn't president. For 4.5 years, that's all they've cared about. July 31st, 2016, before he was elected the first time, Jim Comey's FBI takes out the insurance policy, opens an investigation on the president based on nothing. May 17th, 2017, Bob Mueller named special counsel. 2 years, they investigate the Russia hoax, 19 lawyers, 40 agents, and $40 million of taxpayer money for nothing. December 18th, 2019, Democrat House members vote to impeach President Trump. based on an anonymous whistleblower with no firsthand knowledge who was biased against the president and who worked for Joe Biden. But none of that worked. As hard as they tried, none of that worked. They threw everything they had at him. So what'd they do next? They changed the rules. They changed the election law, and they did it in an unconstitutional fashion. And that's what we're going to show over the next several hours of debate. The Constitution is clear, as Whip Scalise just said. State legislatures and only state legislatures set election law. In Arizona, the law says voter registration ends on October 5th. Democrats said, we don't care what the law says. They went to a court, got an Obama-appointed judge to extend it 18 days. No debate, as Steve talked about. No debate, no discussion, he just did it. Pennsylvania, same thing. Pennsylvania law says mail-in ballots have to be in by 8 p.m. Election Day. Democrat Supreme Court said, nope, we're going to extend it. Election Day doesn't end on Tuesday now. They took it to Friday. Extended the election 3 days. Not the legislature, partisan Supreme Court. Pennsylvania law says mail-in ballots require signature verification. Democrat Secretary of State said, nope, I'm going to decide by myself that it doesn't. For 2.6 million ballots. Pennsylvania law says mail-in ballots can't be processed until Election Day. Some counties said no. And you can imagine which counties they were. Democrat-run counties said no and allowed ballots to be cured and fixed before Election Day. They did an in-run around the Constitution in every state that Republicans will object to today. Every single one. It was a pattern. It was their template. They did it in Arizona. They did it in Georgia. They did it in Michigan. They did it in Pennsylvania. They did it in Nevada. They did it in Wisconsin. And yet some members say, don't worry about it. We shouldn't do anything. Just let it go. It was just 6 states who violated the Constitution. What if it's 10 states the next time? What if it's 15? What if in 2024, 2028, it's 26 states? What if it's half the states do an end run around the Constitution clearly spells out? We are the final check and balance. The authority rests with us, the United States Congress, the body closest to the American people, right where the founders wanted it. We should do our duty. We should object to and vote for this objection to the Arizona electors. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. Purpose does the gentleman from California seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
The gentleman is recognized without objection for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, a little more than 2 months ago, America performed an extraordinary feat. Under some of the most trying circumstances
2 months
in
in
our
court,
history,
looking
our
for a
fellow
judge
citizens
to embrace
conducted
these.
A free and fair election, vindicating our founders' belief once again that we were capable of self-government and a peaceful transition of power. On November 3rd, the American people chose Joe Biden to be their next president by an enormous margin. The successful conduct of that election, among the most secure in American history, was not an accident. It was the result of the dedicated work of thousands of volunteers, canvassers, poll workers, electors, and state and local election officials. When the conduct of any state election was challenged, the courts, through judges appointed by Democrats and those appointed by Republicans, heard unsubstantiated claims of fraud, found they had no merit, and said so. But most important, the American people persevered. In the midst of the worst pandemic in a century, America had one of the most impressive elections in a century with historic voter turnout. Our fellow citizens did their civic duty. The question we face today is, will we do ours? That we are here with a substantial number of our members seeking to overturn an election is remarkable, tragic, and all too predictable. For it is the natural result of a locomotive set in motion months ago with a myth. For weeks and weeks before, during, and after our election, a dangerous falsehood was propagated
that our election would be marred by massive fraud. Never mind, it was the same election which brought the very men and women to this chamber who would challenge its results. What value has consistency when measured against ambition? A former senator from Georgia, remarking on a contested election over a century ago, said that able men, learned men, distinguished men, great men in the eyes of the nation seemed intent only on accomplishing a party triumph without regard to the consequences to the country. That is human nature. That is, he said, unfortunately, party nature. Was he right? We stand in a house which was once the place of giants. Have we become so small? Does our oath to uphold the Constitution, taken just days ago, mean so very little?
Addresses on the voter rolls. Here is a stack of 1,000 declaration of affidavits supporting that. I object to the counting the votes of Arizona electors because the federal courts went around the legislatively constructed mechanism for choosing Arizona's presidential electors, allowing tens of thousands of voters to unlawfully cast votes. The court usurped a key component of the Arizona legislature's manner of selecting presidential electors, thus violating Article 2, Section 1. The legislature is being obstructed in its efforts. And what little evidence we have, or little information we have, has produced this kind of evidence which indicates a significant problem with the integrity of the presidential election. Madam Speaker, I ask that my written comments, together with the voter registration records that reflect the 32,000 registrations permitted in contravention of state law, letters and resolutions from Arizona legislators pertaining to the count of votes from electors, along with approximately 1,000 affidavits and declarations pertaining to potential voter fraud in Arizona in the 2020 presidential election, and the statement of Congressman Randy Weber of Texas be made a part of the record. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank the gentleman. For what purpose does the gentleman from Maryland seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I rise in opposition to the objection.
The gentleman is recognized without objection for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I want to thank you for has been. I've been a constitutional law professor for 30 years, and if I were to test my students on these decisions, it would be the easiest test in the world because the plaintiffs have lost nearly every case and every issue in the most sweeping terms. That's all they would have to remember. There is no basis in fact or law to justify the unprecedented relief that is being requested of nullifying these elections. We are here to count the votes. Let us do our job.
Gentleman's time, okay. Thank you. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Colorado seek recognition?
I rise to support the objection.
The gentlewoman is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And to ease everyone's nerve, I want you to all know that I am not here to challenge anyone to a duel like Alexander Hamilton or Aaron Burr. Madam Speaker, my primary objection to the counting of the electoral votes of the state of Arizona is based on the Constitution and the direction of state legislatures through state law as spelled out in the following 2 clauses. Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 states in part, and I quote, "Each state shall appoint in such manner as the legislature thereof may direct a number of electors." And the election clause of the Constitution provides state legislatures with explicit authority to prescribe, and I quote, "the times, places, and manners of holding elections," end quote. For more than 3 decades, Arizona law set by the state legislature has required that voter registration end no later than 29 days before an election. This is clear. It is law. Unless amended by the state legislature, this is the way it needs to be carried out. In Arizona, the deadline for voter registration for the 2020 presidential election was October 5, 2020. Using COVID as a reasoning, Democrats filed a lawsuit to extend this deadline by 18 days. And an injunction was made by an Obama-appointed judge preventing the Arizona Secretary of State from enforcing the constitutional deadline set by the state legislature. As a result of this frivolous partisan lawsuit, 10 extra days were added via judicial fiat to allow voter registration. These 10 days were added after voting had already begun.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go down for 1 minute. We'll be right back up. I've got to get more than one stream up. The protesters out front of the Capitol are trying to get in the building. I will be right back up.